Ladies and gentlemen, let's stand for the playing of the national anthem, followed by prayer by Canon Kitson.
Let us remain standing for prayer. In the name of the Creator, the fountain and source of life, in the name of the one who sustains us and has redeemed us for the abundant eternal life, in the name of the sustaining Spirit who guides us and sustains all life within creation. Except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that built it. Except the Lord watches over the city, the watchman waketh, but in vain. Blessed Lord, we give you thanks that in your mighty wisdom you have brought forth a nation and a people. We pray for this nation, for Governor General, Prime Minister, Leader of the Parliamentary Opposition, members of the House of Representatives, and all members of the judiciary. Lord of creation, we pray for the work of the Micheal Manley Foundation. May they disseminate knowledge so that the nation will come to understand the vision of the fourth Prime Minister of Jamaica. Be with us this afternoon in this our fellowship. We ask, O Lord God, that the work of the foundation will be sustained by your presence. And we pray that all things will be done to your honor and your glory. In and through Jesus Christ, our Lord, we pray. Amen. The Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. The Almighty God bless us and keep us by the power of his Spirit, and in the name of Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Let us be seated. Although I've been invited to say prayer, and that I should just pray and sit down, I will extend the patience of those who invited me to be here by just saying a few words. Beloved sisters and brothers, one of the things that I find a little distasteful is when persons have done their best and invested a lot of effort, whether it is in a project or activity, and those who see their efforts and see how they have invested of their time and their energies, look at them and say, "You're not do too bad, you know. Yeah, man, you're not do too bad." It's a kind of backhand compliment. I dislike it. I dislike it a lot. Because the other way of saying, you're doing well. You're doing the best you can. It lifts the human spirit, inspires the heart of the soul, rather than, you know, you're not too bad, you know. It's like you're a second and or third hand. It's very unfortunate. It's unfortunate because as a people, Jamaicans from our walk of life, we are doing quite good, not the best. We're doing quite good. At times we're more critical of ourselves than how other people see us. And that's very unfortunate. One of the areas where we need to grow as a people is to commend those who have done well, to commend those who have lifted this country, to commend those who have worked hard for the elevation of the people. My time is up in a second. However, I make that preface in that regardless of whatever shade you may wear, whether it be orange or green, we need to commend those who have done well as leaders of this nation. And that's not political. They have done well. For when you look at the legislative changes of one who led this nation in the 1970s, there is no other prime minister to compare. None. Maternity leave with pay.
No, we have to stop. We have to stop.
And then here I have to stop. But what is certain is that there cometh a nation that knoweth not fear, and there hath cometh a generation that knoweth not what has taken place. The bastard law. Me a bastard, no longer illegitimate. And that one stick out for me. That's why I stand here and talk so long. God bless you.
And let's commend the Reverend. Honorable Mia Mottley, Prime Minister of Barbados and guest speaker this evening, the Most Honorable Percival James Patterson, former Prime Minister of Jamaica, Mark Golding, Leader of the Opposition and President of the People's National Party, His Worship Mayor of Kingston, Councillor Andrew Swaby, members of the Diplomatic Corps, Dr. Peter Phillips, former President of the PNP, Ms. Glyn Manley and members of the Manley family, Chairperson and members of the Michael Manley Foundation, distinguished ladies and gentlemen who are supporters of the transformative work of Michael Manley, good evening. My name is Dania Beckford and I'm honored, absolutely elated to be guiding the program for you this evening. This is not just a celebration of the birthday of Michael Manley because we know he would have been 100 today. It's also a reminder because we know that change is coming, right? And when change comes, Michael Manley said something very important. He says that any realistic vision of change has to be based on the notion of the empowerment of the people. And so I have no doubt that you'll be empowered this evening. And so let's start off officially in the program with a welcome by Senator Donna Scott Motley, Chairperson of the Michael Manley Foundation.
What an honor. Honorable Mia Mottley, Prime Minister of Barbados, and our guest speaker, the Most Honorable Percival James Patterson, former Prime Minister of Jamaica, Mr. Mark Golding, Leader of the Opposition and President of the People's National Party, His Worship the Mayor of Kingston, Councillor Andrew Swaby, members of the Diplomatic Corps, Dr. Peter Phillips, former President of the People's National Party, Most Honorable Glenn Manley, and members of the Manley family, the members of the Michael Manley Foundation, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, friends all, I am so delighted to welcome you this afternoon. You will be pleased to note that I have no speech and that I do not intend to list Michael's achievements. I am leaving that to others who will come. But I want to say that this occasion is a very emotional one for me because 30 years ago, I was part of the planning committee to honor Michael on his 70th birthday. And it is a remarkable coincidence that I stand on this stage 30 years later to celebrate his 100th birthday. I cannot help but note that today is International Human Rights Day. And I think in the context of our celebration, we should applaud the fact that the two dates coincide, because that is one thing that Michael honored, treasured, and tried to protect. I also want to specially thank Prime Minister Mia Mottley for joining us on this occasion. I would like to say to all of you that she said yes because of me. But that would be an unfortunate lie. I met Mia Mottley over, I think, 35 years ago, before she was actively engaged in politics, and she has been my friend and now family throughout those years. And all along, a constant hero in her life has been Michael Manley. Indeed, she is a kind of leader that we should all aspire to have, a bold, courageous, transformational leader. Who, like Michael, is not afraid to speak truth to power. She represents the voice of the voiceless, not just people, but of nations. I want to thank the Michael Manley Foundation, the members who are seated, you can't see them, but they are seated to the right, for honoring me by asking me to chair the foundation at this significant time. I have a mandate to make sure that before the year is out, all of you will remember Michael and have his name on your lips every day. We have started our work. I thank Ainsley Henriquez for being the guardian and custodian of the Manley family, but I moved Michael from regardless. And Michael Manley Collection now resides in a place where all prime ministers should be, at the University of the West Indies. There are some distinguished ladies in the audience who helped to make it a reality. And very soon you'll be hearing more about that. I promised myself that I would share with everyone the greatness of this man. And so, on behalf of the Michael Manley Foundation, I welcome you. I celebrate you for being here, and I trust that you will enjoy the feast of intellect which awaits you.
Thank you so much, Senator Motley. I'm told that the President of the Senate, Mr. Tom Tavares Finson, is also here, and so I want us to welcome him. Thank you for being here, sir. And also all the members of the People's National Party Executive, thank you so much for coming as well. Now, our next person on stage, I met only 4 years ago, and I've seen him on TV, didn't really know him, and then something came up and I decided I needed to meet him because for every time that I saw him spoke, my mother would have said there was a little twinkle in her eye. And me hear my grandmother talk about that same twinkle there when Micheal Manley used to talk. And when I finally met him, I recognized what the twinkle was. It was authenticity. It was somebody who really cared for the weak and who is genuine. And it reminded me of something that Micheal Manley said. He said, there is no greater dignity than that of being able to control your destiny. And that's something that this person also preaches. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome the Leader of the Opposition and President of the People's National Party, Mr. Mark Golding.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to gratefully adopt the protocols that have already been observed, but just to specifically recognize Prime Minister Mia Mottley, former Prime Minister P.J. Patterson, and former party leader and leader of the opposition, Dr. Peter Phillips. I wish to begin firstly by welcoming the Honorable Prime Minister Mia Mottley to Jamaica and thanking her for agreeing and taking the time to visit us to deliver this much anticipated lecture. And also by congratulating Senator Donna Scott Motley and the Micheal Manley Foundation and other organizers of this wonderful occasion in honor of Micheal Manley on the 100th anniversary of his birth. As the current president of the People's National Party, I stand on the shoulders of the 5 leaders who came before me. I am fortunate to have had a personal relationship with 4 of them, the first of those being Micheal Manley, who I initially got to know when, as a teenager in the early 1980s, I was friendly with his then-wife, Beverly's niece, and was a regular visitor to their home on Washington Close. Long ago. We later renewed our relationship in the 1990s, when he, having just retired from politics, was the principal consultant on the Government of Jamaica's Employee Share Ownership ESOP program, a program which he had spearheaded before his retirement and remained passionate and committed to, while I was involved in the legal work to develop the ESOP legislation. That happenstance meant that we met at least once a month on his veranda at Heathwood to discuss the ESOP program. But invariably, the conversation would end up drifting into current affairs as he would exhort young persons of my generation, like me at the time, to get involved in the political life and development of our country. I would never have imagined then that one day I'd be giving remarks in the capacity as leader of the PNP at a lecture in his honor. There is no doubt that Micheal Manley was a most consequential Caribbean political leader. He was truly a Jamaican Renaissance man, a passionate intellectual with a wide range of interests, including a deep love of sports, art, and music. His oratory and charm were unparalleled, and I believe it's safe to say that he is the most loved political leader Jamaica has produced. And with the benefit of hindsight, he's increasingly recognized as a visionary leader whose ideas for creating a more fair and just society out of the cauldron of our colonial experience were often before their time. Micheal Manley was courageous. He recognized that incremental adjustments to the status quo would not meet the needs and expectations of the majority of Jamaicans. And he was always willing to take bold steps towards the positive transformation of the society and indeed the world. From lying down in the road as a trade union leader in furtherance of the JBC workers' protest, to standing up to Henry Kissinger and our mighty neighbor to the north on a matter of principle when pressured to abandon Cuba in its military support of the liberation struggle of the Angolan people against the invasion of the apartheid regime in South Africa. Micheal was courageous. During his first period as Prime Minister from 1972 to 1980, Micheal's policies and programs were developed through a democratic socialist ideological lens. This necessitated far-reaching changes to Jamaica's economy and society, which, a decade after political independence, had continued to be structured along strict classist and race-configured colonial norms. Over the course of those 8 years, Jamaica was deeply transformed in profound ways never attempted, much less achieved, either before or since. In support of the rights and interests of workers, of women, of children born out of wedlock, and so much more. The influence of Micheal's thought and mission reverberated across the region and made him a towering third world figure on the world stage as he advocated relentlessly for the emergence of a new international economic order based on principles of equity, which would provide a more level playing field for post-colonial economies in trade, finance, and overall development. In the second half of the 1970s, the backlash to this transformation that was instigated by the political representatives of the privileged status quo in Jamaica, aided by their external Cold War backers, was relentless and severe, resulting in a concerted propaganda war against his government and the intensification of political violence as a tool of destabilization, ultimately resulting in the bloody 1980 general election defeat of the People's National Party. While a lot has been said and written about aspects of that period of our history, much of what took place has remained untold other than in private conversations. Such is the vestigial, unresolved impact of that era on the nation's consciousness. While that 8-year-old period of Micheal Manley's career in government generally attracts the most attention and is often viewed nostalgically as the heyday of progressive achievement in Jamaica, his second period as Prime Minister from 1989 to 1992 was also very consequential. In fact, certainly in terms of economics, the latter period had a more lasting impact than the first. Part 2 of Micheal Manley in government established the basic economic model that Jamaica has been pursuing for the last 40 years. He recognized the essential role of business in driving economic growth and rapidly liberalized the economy through removing exchange controls, eliminating price controls, and substantially getting rid of the licensing regimes for imports and exports. All this was in keeping with the economic orthodoxy which emerged as dominant in the post-Cold War era and was done with the strong encouragement of the leaders of the private sector of the time. However, these were fundamental economic changes, and it took Jamaica quite some time to adjust and learn the fundamental rules and techniques of managing a small, open economy, but learn we did over the following decades. I would therefore argue that the seeds that have ultimately led to the last decade's dramatic public debt reduction and other macro-fiscal successes for which Jamaica is now internationally recognized were sown by Micheal Manley's bold reforms that created the basic economic model, which is now generally regarded as uncontroversial. The unresolved challenge that we face as a nation now is how to move from macro-fiscal stability to inclusive, sustainable development that works for all. There is much in the teachings of Micheal Manley, thankfully committed by him to writing in his many books and recorded speeches, that remain relevant to the task at hand. However, we are now faced with a world which is very different to that which Micheal strode as a third world colossus. A new wave of right-wing leadership is emerging across Western democracies as diverse demographic groups such as minorities, young men, and disgruntled and alienated working class persons reject the placid complacency and self-righteousness of mature Western liberalism. This is happening even as the economic balance of power shifts eastward to China and India, and the phenomenon of BRICS begins to emerge with alternatives to the post-World War II structures which have underpinned Western dominance in global finance and trade. Amidst all these uncertainties and risks, the principles of social justice and equality of access to opportunity, which Micheal Manley steadfastly championed like no other throughout his life, must remain our guide as we seek for solutions in a very different era of the politics of change, and renew the search for solutions which are pragmatic but principled responses to the deep, unresolved challenges of our time. Happily, a towering Caribbean statesperson has emerged. The inspirational Caribbean leader of this era, who is with us this afternoon. Mia Mottley has been relentless and uncompromising in her international advocacy for justice and equity in the global response to the climate crisis, and for fundamental changes to the international financial system to enable small countries like ours to survive and hopefully thrive. In this regard, Mia has manifestly inherited and assumed the mantle of Micheal Manley. No doubt, drawing inspiration from him as she boldly takes on the powerful vested interests of international capitalism, the international system that desperately needs fundamental change in the face of the existential threats facing the globe. So, we are truly blessed. It is absolutely fitting to have Mia here with us on this occasion. And so I close by joyously proclaiming, from Micheal to Mia to the world.
Indeed. Mr. Golding's remarks underscored that Michael Manley was indeed a man before his time, a man of all seasons, and we are most elated to see Mia Mottley to the world. Now, you know there can't be no event in Jamaica without we bring the culture into it, right? And when we think about culture in Jamaica, we think about dancing, right? No, I'm not gonna dance for you tonight. However, CDT is prepared to give you an excerpt from Calabash, which is choreographed by the late Tony Wilson. Let's make them welcome.
Hey! Prime Minister Mia Mottley, Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Mark Golding, former Leader of the PNP, Dr. Phillips, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Today, as we gather to celebrate the 100th birthday of a great and visionary leader, Micheal Manley, I feel like a fortunate punter who won the twin double at Caymanas in the Mute Mile last Saturday. I had to step to the crease because I have been invited to pay tribute to the life and political legacy of that towering icon, Micheal Manley, in shaping the landscape of our nation and the voyage to regional economic integration, and also to introduce our distinguished guest speaker. I am privileged to do so as one who occupied the bridge between our legendary trailblazer, Micheal Manley, and the advent to the helm in our region of Honorable Prime Minister Mia Mottley as Prime Minister of Barbados. She stands apart as the one who continues to provide outstanding leadership for the entire Caribbean in the international arena. There is a clear link, which is already evident, but it will become even more obvious to our proceedings here today. I have a lot that I will not say. Jamaica's fourth Prime Minister, Micheal Manley, understood from the very start that our island's economic development was to a great extent determined by the abomination of slavery and colonial exploitation. He deplored that iniquitous global system which had resulted in adverse forms of trade, the absence of supreme control over our natural resources, and the denial of remunerative prices for our primary commodities. Manley recognized that in order to address these age-old deficits, there was required a framework that would also make the Caribbean voice stronger than the sum total of the region's separate voices. In conceiving and concluding the Treaty of Chaguaramas in 1973, Micheal Manley was one of the four principal architects and engineers in that push to explore common incentive policies towards investment and a common external tariff. There are time limits which I will follow, especially as I see members of the judiciary in the House. I want to draw direct attention to one of the main significant features of the treaty, and it is that provision which relates to the conduct of foreign policy. Nowhere was that determination to chart our own course more clearly demonstrated than the earth-shattering decision by four Caribbean heads of the independent countries in 1972 to repudiate the U.S. punitive embargo against Cuba and establish full diplomatic relationships with an island that, whether others like it or not, is inexorably a nation of the Caribbean Sea. A few days ago, in light of emerging changes on the global landscape, Our longest-serving Prime Minister, Dr. Ralph Gonsalves, well known to all of us, has warned, now more than ever, the unity of our Caribbean is essential. To that I say a loud amen. That bold step decades ago has yielded long and substantial benefits to our healthcare, our educational system, and a range of technical cooperation agreements in several fields, so that even those who were vigorously opposed then, whether for mischief or partisan advantage, have long come around to applaud and engage. The Cuban ambassador is in the house, and I ask him to take a message back to Cuba. Venceremos. "52 years after, when Cuba is experiencing severe setbacks to the deleterious effects of Helms-Burton and the horrible exclusion from trading access in essential supplies, as well as lucrative tourism markets, it is worthy of commendation that the Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, was the first to step forward and offer maximum support in a time of dire need to a generous neighbor. I hope others will follow that example. Micheal's mantra was the search for equality and the building of a just society, a cause to which he devoted his catalytic energy, his fertile imagination, all eloquently couched with his persuasive, his oratorical mastery. Whether in the fight for a new international economic order, the eradication of apartheid, the case for ideological pluralism, or obedience to one international law which applies universally to all nations and people, irrespective of wealth or military might, Micheal Manley's inspiring voice brought a consistent sense of hope and purpose to the entire Caribbean region. Throughout Africa, the continent where human civilization began, but carved up and pilloried by European partners for their own aggrandizement. The world today renders us more vulnerable than ever was the one we knew. The existing global order is obsolete. It was fashioned by the victors of World War II. There is autocracy of the Security Council and impotence when a permanent member with veto powers is involved, as we see in Ukraine and the injustices in Gaza. The Bretton Woods institutions have become dysfunctional and obsolescent in facing the financial challenges that confront us today. New challenges have emerged with health pandemics, global warming, and the rapid changes with the advent of new technology and artificial intelligence. I don't think anyone can say it with greater conviction than I. As Micheal Manley was for the NIU, no one has been more articulate in the last decade than Mia Mottley. For that seismic abandonment of the existing world order and determined to include the interests of the developing world. To respond to this dire situation, Mia has been the conceptualizer of the Barbados initiative, which would entail significant changes to the entire international financial framework. It would unleash the new global response to mounting debt, global warming, sustainable development of small island development states. She chairs the CARICOM Commission on Reparative Justice. She is setting the pace in building the umbilical lines with Africa. That is why she is hosting in Barbados a Frexim Bank to serve the 6th region of Africa. Africa is now destined to be the continent of the future. So you can easily appreciate why our guest speaker is the ideal speaker for today's memorable event. I had to speak to her in avuncular tones yesterday to remind her of something Micheal Manley wrote me when I succeeded him. He says, the body has limits, and you are no good to the advance of the cause and the completion of the mission when you're dead. But of course, even though dead, Micheal Manley speaks still. Our guest speaker is courageous, recognizing that we have the right to choose our own partners and build our own alliances. That's our right and our business, as Micheal Manley said time and time again. She is prepared to school the president-elect on the devastating impact of climate change, including the United States, because the same hurricanes that hit us threaten to destroy portions of the southern states. So who better to grace us with this inaugural lecture as we commemorate the 100th birthday of one who was an apostle for the developing world, an evangelist for the sanctity of human dignity, and an unrepentant Caribbean regionalist. I'm not going to let out the secrets why, despite a demand for her at every conceivable conference and forum, she chose to be here to honor Micheal Manley. I will let her reveal the details when she comes to speak. So, it is my privilege on your behalf to use this opportunity to present a brilliant leader who truly understands the complexity of our regional space and who sees clearly how best we pursue the course together to build a truly great and amazing Caribbean civilization. I present to you none other than the Prime Minister of Barbados, the Honorable Mia Mottley.
Former Prime Minister Percival James Patterson, Leader of the Opposition, the Honourable Mark Golden, former Leader of the Opposition, and forgive me, I like to see people's eyes, former Leader of the Opposition, my good friend Peter Phillips, members of the executive of the Michael Manley Foundation, members of those entities related wholly or otherwise to the Michael Manley Foundation. And they asked me what I wanted to speak about today. And I thought, and I thought, and I thought. And I decided that there was only one thing which I could speak about. Yes, the word is love. Let me, at the outset, thank the Foundation and the Manley family, with whom I spent a wonderful hour and a half today, for the absolute privilege of being able to deliver this lecture on the 100th birthday of a great Caribbean titan. And I do so conscious that 5 years ago, in 2020, I had the same privilege of doing that for Errol Walton Barrow, who, in spite of belonging to a different political party from the one that I lead, was among those great Caribbean, and in my case, Barbadian builders, father of independence, along with persons like Grantley Adams and Norman Washington Manley, and Tom Adams, who helped lay the foundation in our own case for a modern economy, and of course, Owen Arthur, who continued to lecture us week by week in Cabinet about the benefits and the legacy of Michael Manley for 14 years. But you may be forgiven to believe that that might be the reason why I'm here alone. The truth is that as a very young child, in fact, in first form, I first got my first set of, I almost say bullying, from the sixth formers in Queen's College, from sitting on the sixth form veranda. I had the audacity to do so. But I was walking with a book, and they pulled the book from me to see what I was reading. And disappointed that it was not Mills and Boons or Hardy Boys or Nancy Drew, they then continued to rail me because the book was The Politics of Change by Michael Manley. I did not touch it again as a whole book until last Thursday, and reread it. And throughout this afternoon, we'll continue to reflect and better understand as an adult how much of what I came to represent and believe in was effectively shaped in those very early years in understanding the writings and the beliefs of Michael Manley. But there is one other story that I will share before getting into the meat of the occasion. Because in one's life, you remember when you have to wear a cast, especially when you have to wear it for 6 weeks. And in my life, I have worn a cast only once, on my left leg, knee down to ankle. And one morning, when I was about 16 or so, Errol Barrow called and said, "Tell your mother and your father, don't cook tonight. I'm bringing Michael and I'm coming." And I said, "Sure." And I said, "But by the way, let it be early because for the first time we're launching jazz at the Waterfront Cafe. And it is my first foray in managing the band down there with Arturo, who you now know as Arturo Tappan, and Nicholas Branca of Grammy fame. So I would like both of you to come, and he said yes. During the course of the evening, Michael put his drink behind him, and the dog was making for it. And I felt I had a duty to defend the honor of the house and not let the dog drink from his glass. Little did I know that coral stone with moss on it can be very slippery, and my ankle went right under. But I was so intent, one, on securing the band being able to play again at the Waterfront, and equally, to be able to say that two former prime ministers would have enjoyed what I'm sure they would have enjoyed had they gone to see it, that I insisted on ignoring the pain and going to carry Micheal Manley and Errol Barra to hear jazz. The next morning, the foot was twice as big. And the lesson really is that I paid a huge, huge price for wanting to be able to share in the aura of two great Caribbean men on that night. I give you these few jokes and stories because, in a very real sense, you cannot talk about Micheal Manley and his politics without appreciating Micheal Manley and the man, and his utter and absolute charm and ability to make even me as a young teenager feel that there was purpose in all that we were doing, but that equally that there was a larger mission which embraced us all as Caribbean people. I would later spend many hours next to him at Brandon's tennis when he would come to Barbados, and I would usually be the one there next to them watching tennis at Paradise on that occasion. I am honored because when, and I hope that many of you who have not read it will still read it, pick up this seminal work, with the exception of maybe one chapter, the contents of this book remain as relevant today as they were when the book was written almost 50 years ago. And I'm conscious that in this book, you understand fully why the word is love came to represent so much of the policies and programs identified in a philosophy that saw people, that heard people, and that felt people. I am not the one to give you a historical treatise on all of the achievements of Micheal Manley. But suffice it to say that in this small Caribbean, there are some things that stand out, if only because for too much of our history, our parliament was used as an instrument of oppression rather than a tool of enfranchisement and empowerment. That we have not even yet reached 100 years of being able to be firm craftsmen of our fate speaks volumes. But that we have, in this short period of time, been able to reverse aspects of our legislation that literally choked us and denied us the dignity of agency and the dignity of our humanity is a major, major accomplishment. In our case, it cut across many leaders. In yours, it did. But some of these things stand out purely because of the majesty of the legislative transformation and the social transformation. The repealing of the Master and Servants Act, an iniquitous piece of legislation that sought to bind us in as close to bonds of slavery without slavery being legal. The establishment of a national minimum wage, something that eluded many, many countries for many, many decades before you established it here. Maternity leave with pay, which we actually did slightly before you, but Micheal Manley made sure that you did it. Gender equity and pay scales. Other laws, as we heard tonight, that outlawed bastardy, as we did too, around the same time. A law that established your National Housing Trust, I'm told, that transformed the fate of so many of your citizens. But it is not simply in the announcement and the passage and the recitation of these policies that it matters. It is also in the essence of the man, believing that fundamental to the building of a society is the dignity to be accorded to each and every citizen, to see, hear, and feel each and every citizen. And we take this sometimes for granted because the world in which we live doesn't even admit of it. Countries that are large sometimes don't see or feel small countries. The reality is that it is a rare, rare virtue. And for the last 6 years, I started to reflect on how much the world looked like 100 years ago. And that in truth and in fact, we are in the throes of an inflection point, a historic movement that really, really, today, causes us to have to pause. And the danger is that we might be at risk of being distracted from the fundamental things that truly make a difference to our planet and to our people, and by extension, to our Caribbean civilization. The reality is that what we are witnessing, in my view, is really the dying of an old order without yet seeing where the new order will be located and how it will be framed. The Italian philosopher Antonio Gramsci wrote in his famous prison notebooks, and I quote, "The old world is dying, and the new world struggles to be born. Now is the time of monsters," unquote. And what are those monsters today? Is it the climate crisis? I don't refer to it as climate change because there's nothing about change in the crisis that we face. It is a season of superlatives, and it's the season of the unexpected. We see it from the droughts, to the floods, to the hurricanes, to the sargassum seaweed, to so many other things that are so unrealistic. I'm accustomed to convection rain here in Kingston, not in Bridgetown. For the last 2 years, we experienced that from August to December, almost 5 days a week. While at the same time, for the first 6 months of last year, we had less than 50% rainfall of the average 30 years that went before, in the same year. The monsters are the pandemics. And we acknowledge that with the increased heat, we are likely to see new pathogens develop, and by extension, new pandemics are likely to emerge. But even as we speak, separate from that, our abuse of antibiotics, antimicrobials, has led to an extraordinary level of antimicrobial resistance that now makes that responsible for the third highest number of deaths directly and indirectly in the world, and by 2050, it shall be responsible for the highest volume of deaths in the world, reversing a century of medical progress and making simple things like going to the dentist or going in the garden or having a baby risky things if you get an infection. We have seen environmental degradation generally, but in particular degradation of our soils. And there is the belief that it will considerably impact the already threatened food security that we have as a result of the impact of climate itself. But soil degradation in and of itself will make it worse. We are seeing the collapse of ecosystems and the collapse of and further loss of biodiversity. Things that we were accustomed to seeing are finding themselves removed from our environment. And at the same time, globally, we have 35 million people, refugees, across the world, fleeing wars, violence, persecution, and abject poverty, right here in our own region to across the world. The world itself is a dangerous place to be. The 1st of December, France had a government, as did Syria. Today, the 10th of December, both have been gone for a few days, one by law and one by force. We are at an interesting point. We hear of the movement against incumbents more than anything else. Some of it expresses itself in right-wing populism, some of it in the UK, left of center. But in both instances, it's an anti-incumbent move, largely because much of what people have had to experience in this polycrisis moment in the last 5 years has made life difficult for most and perplexing for all. The spectacle of fake news and the inability to control a narrative to build a nation, where broadcasting used to be the order of the day and now narrowcasting and echo chambers replace it. We have more than ever to determine what does love look like in this, the third decade of the 21st century. And because time limits me, I'll just address a few matters. One, as it relates to regional integration and foreign policy. Two, as it relates to the reform of the international financial system, and by extension, our capacity to meet the global public goods that are critical for our survival on the planet as people. And finally, the utter and absolute importance as Caribbean people of the psychological reinforcement of our cultural identity to give us purpose and to give us unity and solidarity to weather these difficult times as the New World Order finds itself emerging. May not be for a few decades, maybe as soon as the next 5-10 years. And it is slow upon us when all of a sudden, as we saw in Syria, it is immediately upon us. And that is the nature of the world in which we live today, where the powers that influence and the information that is generated goes way beyond the nation state. And to that extent, on this day of International Human Rights Day, one asks yourself, what will that new world order look like? And what will truly be the power of nation states? Will small states be able to survive without deep functional cooperation and pooling? Or will they become collateral victims as the world seeks to line up behind great powers yet again? Particularly if the multilateral rules-based system that we have is not allowed to work for us. I say to you that it is critical that we not be sucked in to the bankruptcy of the current global world order. And if we go back to what love was for Micheal Manley, and I'm amazed at the extent to which even the language used foretold the times in which we come to live in. There is no doubt that we are in a race against time, and those who doubt it will fail to prepare. And that, for us, means that we recognize that love fundamentally is about caring, seeing, hearing, and feeling. Fundamentally is about resilience, a word that Micheal used more ahead of his time than most. And love is about transformation. We have taken long to do some of these things, not because of laziness, but because of the complexity of the root system that has caused us to be victims of another order that effectively took away from us identity and movement. And I dare say that so fundamental is the human resistance against that type of activity that I really believe that that is one of the reasons for the strong anti-incumbent movement globally, coming after 2 to 3 years of restricted movement and increased cost of living, where persons are trying to recoup losses in the shortest possible time from a pandemic, that has caused people to say, hey, you didn't see me for a few years, but watch me now, I'm here. And if you don't realize I'm here, I'm going to show you that I'm here. And we've seen it country by country by country by country. But if we come to understanding what that race to become resilient must look like, it is being thrown at us more than ever through the climate crisis. And that is why, in a very real sense, the global south, in its victimhood, has a renewed sense of solidarity, because we all know that we didn't cause the problem, and that in fact we are now bearing double jeopardy, because having been the beast of burden to enrich those who built the Industrial Revolution, we are now the first victims on the front line to the consequences of the Industrial Revolution in terms of greenhouse warming. And that solidarity is not in a vacuum, because at the same time that we seek to save ourselves from the climate crisis, you're asking us to divert critical capacity and financing away from the noble objectives of development as best captured in the Sustainable Development Goals. It is not on. And we can no longer move in one direction to fight climate, then we can move in the other direction alone to fight development and ignore climate. We must walk and chew. And it is a false dichotomy to ask people to choose between people and planet. The foreign policy, therefore, that we have has first and foremost today to reinforce that effort that Micheal Manley brought to bear in bringing unity among the global south, the former colonies, to be able to define a policy and fiscal space that was sufficiently large to pursue the policies that would empower and enrich our people and accord to them the dignity that has always been theirs, but was robbed because of the iniquitous institutions of slavery and colonialism and imperialism. We have, at this point, to recognize that that common purpose, and I have the honor to lead now the climate vulnerable countries of the world, otherwise known as the V20 group, which now embraces 70 countries from across Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean and Latin America. Recognizing that our common purpose in fighting the battles against the climate crisis and finding the financing necessary to secure our way, and also conscious of the pathogens that may develop, because health can immediately trump anything if a pandemic hits us in the way that the last one did. These countries are no more different from the countries Michael Manley dealt with 50 years ago, but with few voices listening and few countries feeling. Mark Golding spoke earlier, and Prime Minister Patterson, about some of the common challenges. And the truth is that as we speak, we might have been the canaries in the mine, but the climate crisis has now literally crept in to the reality of the lives of those in the global north. Whether it is the wildfires in California and Canada and Europe, or it is the floods or the hurricanes, there is no part of Earth that is being exempt from it. And if we don't recognize that our primary purpose and gaze must be to fight this battle unless some people have a plan to live on Mars that we don't know about, then we will lose the battle. The reality is that there are diverging views, and we must take the world as we find it, not as we dream for. And if we are to do so, and I don't normally disagree with Prime Minister Patterson, I'm not trying to school the President-elect, but I'm conscious that while we may disagree as to the causes of the climate, we cannot disagree as to the reality of disaster. And in a very real sense, our love of planet requires of us to have mature conversations that may respect the differences of what brings us to each point, but to find the commonalities for progress to be achieved, because the climate crisis is not waiting on any of us as it unleashes its furor on the world. Against that backdrop, I have said recently and repeat that if there is a way to warp size the research for the commercial application of decarbonizing technology on the fossil fuel industry, bring it on, because that's what we need. And I don't say so tongue-in-cheek, because I'm conscious that there are many countries in the Caribbean now and in Africa whose capacity to finance their development was premised and may still be premised on the fossil fuel industries. But the reality is that if we want that to help be part of the equation, then we need to make sure that the technology that will decarbonize the emissions is, in fact, applied at commercial scale. And there are aspects of it out there, just not yet rigorous enough. And in the same way that we saw the warp speed with the vaccine research in the pandemic, that is the kind of approach that we now need with respect to the technology. Similarly, we need a global agreement on methane. Methane has 80 times the negative consequences of carbon. Carbon, however, stays in the atmosphere for hundreds of years, whereas methane originally and by itself, will leave after 12 years. How do we do it? Every time a company flares gas, it is losing money and it is hurting the atmosphere. Every time you fail to fix a gas leak in your pipelines, you are doing the same. So let us have an agreement. Make more money by stopping the flaring and fixing the leaks, and at the same time save the atmosphere and the environment from the negative impact of methane gas. Change the manner in which we pursue livestock farming and rice paddy farming, as is beginning to happen. And let us find new practices to inform waste management in our various countries. The reality is that if we do that, the scientists tell us we can actually reverse the temperature by 0.5 degree, rather than seeing the continued forging onward. And therefore, if we can, while disagreeing on the causes of the climate crisis, meet to discuss progress on just those two areas without prejudice to the conversation that we must have, and I'm coming to that, on the financing of global public goods, then I truly believe that we will not waste our time in the next few years. We don't need to agree on every single thing to make progress. And a practical foreign policy will allow us so to do, while each defending their own turf and beliefs, but finding the common purpose that we have as members of humanity. Secondly, we need to recognize that if there is going to be a move away from global trade and globalization generally, then there ought to be a recognition that regional blocs will take on more and more prominence. And it is against that backdrop, therefore, that the commitment to this thing called CARICOM is absolutely and utterly important for us as a region. It has not escaped me that after the demise of the Federation and as a transition from CARIFTA, it was Micheal Manley who in 1973, then having not been a part of CARIFTA in the 1960s when Antigua, Guyana, Barbados and Trinidad signed the Free Trade Agreement, that it was Micheal Manley who brought Jamaica into the Caribbean community with respect to the Treaty of Chaguaramas on the 4th of July, 1973. In reading the book again, I was reminded of the fact that that date also had more significance because it was the birthday of his father, Norman Washington Manley, for whom the other heads of government felt there ought to have been some privilege accorded to him for his successful relationship with the Montego Bay Conference of 1948, which is seen as really the forerunner of the early days of integration in this, our Caribbean community. But what would love look like today? Love for him was coming together to carry on through a market that was bigger than Jamaica in the form of the Caribbean community, which was initially started as a free movement of goods, an area in which the free movement of goods would be started, but which over the decades, and Prime Minister Patterson, I pay tribute to you, and Prime Minister Arthur, who, along with then President Jagdeo and a few others, Prime Minister Manning, were the principal architects of the modern, not at the time of signing, but the actual execution of the CARICOM single market and economy, and the extraordinary burden of removing over 400 obstacles to the doing of business between our countries and discriminatory treatment in a short period of time. Europe took decades, and yet we give ourselves a very, very hard rap for taking as long as we did, but we were much quicker than most would have expected. But what does love look like today? We've added since then security as a fourth pillar, and we did that coming out of Cricket World Cup when we realized, and Peter, I accord the tribute to you, we worked together then to prepare the region for security cooperation at a level never seen before in the independence movement of our region. And that led to security becoming the fourth pillar of the Caribbean community. Today, however, there is still work to be done. And were Micheal Manley alive today, I believe that the recognition that the most important aspect of economic development that we have not addressed in our community relates to the issue of energy. And for whatever reason, it was left out then. Not just in terms of energy as fossil fuel energy, but energy in terms of the tremendous potential that we have as a region with respect to renewables. I believe that the region can no longer pursue this independently, country by country, looking and hoping to capture the attention of a small company here, or a small thing there, or a small thing there, but that there is power in having the audit done, which I've asked the International Financial Corporation to undertake for us, as to what is truly the renewable energy potential of the Caribbean community. And to determine as heads whether not only should we be embracing this within the context of the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas now, in a way that it was left out before, but secondly, to be able to allow us to have greater geopolitical negotiating power in seeking to find a single offtake agreement for the renewable energy potential of the entire Caribbean community. This can be done without compromising the integrity of individual investments in each territory, because there are legal modalities such as segregated cell companies that allow a single company with segregated cells which have immunity against the contagion from any other investment in any other cell. But it will require a mindset change that is recognizing that only in solidarity will we command the power and capacity in this new world that is unfolding. We don't know what it will look like. Only in coming together will we give ourselves the best possible chance to fight not only the climate crisis, but the international economic instability that is coming as a result of the many other polycrises. So pooled investment beyond functional cooperation ought to be a methodology employed by us as a community. In the same way that during the pandemic, we learned the hard way that when no one would even look upon us to offer us a ventilator or vaccines or anything, because it was the wild, wild, wild west, quite frankly, when no one would do it, the African Union and the Afro-Exim Bank stood up to the plate. And I remember chairing CARICOM as I was then, working with them to ensure that a country as small as St. Kitts and Nevis could secure access to therapeutics, vaccines, and equipment at the same price as a country as large as Nigeria. And equally, that India would then have responded, as we have celebrated recently with Prime Minister Modi's visit to the region, in being able to see us and feel us and hear us and give us when others who perhaps had deeper relationships failed so to do. I believe, therefore, that the concept of pooling, which is really a relation to functional cooperation, has to be embraced more vigorously by this Caribbean community, and that there are a number of common problems that most of us face. All of our countries, with the exception of Haiti, are underpopulated, declining and aging populations. In Barbados' case, 1 in every 2 people predicted by ECLAT will be over the age of 65 by the year 2050. Unsustainable. In the case of Trinidad and Jamaica, it is expected to be between 37% and 39% for the 2 countries. Unsustainable. And this is one area in which the region ought to be coming together to make collective decisions, because without people, you cannot sustain the level of growth that is necessary for us to adapt and to build resilience in this fight against the climate crisis that is going to take more and more lives and livelihoods away from us. I pray that we will find and summon the courage, but for me, that is the voice in my head that I hear from Michael Manley with respect to how love is interpreted and built out to ensure that we protect as many lives and livelihoods over the course of our future by recognizing that the way we built, the way we dealt with drainage, the way we dealt with roads, the way we dealt with public infrastructure, all of these things will now change because of the manner in which the climate crisis is unfolding upon our nations. Similarly, that we must try to negotiate all of this, as I said, with a very difficult foreign policy environment. And it is easy and perhaps attractive for some, and we will have to find tactical ways of dealing with it. But I have a very simple approach, that if we are going to say that you can't speak to one and you can't speak to another, then let it apply to all countries of the world. But to the last time I checked, everybody who is a mighty power speaks to everybody, even when they are at war. And therefore, the Caribbean region must retain its options always to maintain communication and to find the best opportunities for our development, because no one is giving us anything to help ourselves. And if we don't understand that it is self-reliance to build resilience, then we better wake up and smell the coffee fast, 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 because that is going to be the only way. This book speaks to resilience and self-reliance, and many of you know from hearing him directly that that was a central core philosophy, because in recognizing that you want independence of spirit, that you want to be friends of all and satellites of none, as Barbados defined its foreign policy to be in 1967 in the first address to the UN, that it means that you have to give yourself the capacity to defend that with dignity. It doesn't mean we will agree on everything, but it does mean that we have the right to communicate with whomsoever we please and on the terms that we believe to be appropriate to guide that level of communication. I want to suggest that one of the things, however, that we need to do is to turn inward and to see how best collectively we can work together to develop that regional self-reliance. Domestic resource mobilization is absolutely critical. And unless we can find a way of financing those resilience building activities, they're not going to happen. That is why my country settled earlier this year a National Investment Resilience Plan for the next decade, because unless we have clarity as to what the public and the private sector must both do to build out those bridges of resilience, they will not happen. We have in the region a level of savings and excess liquidity that is there, in many instances earning at an interest rate much less than inflation. In my own country, a ridiculous amount of 0.1%. In the case of Trinidad and Tobago, 0.5%. In the case of the Eastern Caribbean states, 2%. In Guyana, 2%. And in truth and in fact, divisions over who should finance a CARICOM development fund, which will only reach 200 million or 250 million, really ought to be put one side and a singular focus placed on how do we unlock some of the savings of the region to help finance the resilience and the development of the region while giving people a better interest rate on their savings. It may mean deconstructing a few rules and reconstructing and putting some additional guardrails in place. But it cannot be beyond the governors of the central bank and the ministers of finance of this region to ensure that our region's people have a better chance at earning on their savings while giving us the opportunity to finance a portion of our development as we seek to build resilience and develop adaptation plans. The truth is that we will have to do so with haste. But when we do so, and in the case of Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, the OECS, and Guyana, last week we realized that among the groupings in the Southern Caribbean, the excess savings are, and excess liquidity, is about $8 billion US. If we were to achieve just 1 or 2 billion of that, it gives us greater power in being able to mobilize the capital that is necessary globally, some of which has obviously to be grant and highly concessional funding. And that is why, and I come to discuss for us now, what is really the benefit of Michael Manley's legacy from the advocacy for a new international economic order and fairer terms for global economic activity and trade to our own plans for the reform of the international financial system, which regrettably still carries all of the colors and trademarks of the imperial system that existed before the Bretton Woods institutions were established. When they were established, we simply did not exist as nation states. And that is why the Bridgetown Initiative today has been shaped, and it is by no means me alone, and let me say that for the record. We have taken some of the best in this region and globally and brought them together because it was clear to us that we need policy space and fiscal space. And that the notion of continuing to determine what we can borrow and who we can borrow from and at what interest rates purely on the basis of historic GNI or GDP is as relevant as asking me for my blood pressure 2 years ago to determine if I will have a stroke today. Utterly, utterly useless. The reality is that in the 3 iterations of that plan that we now have, we have seen some success. Barbados was the largest issuer of commercial paper with natural disaster clauses. God forbid, somebody knock wood for me, if we get hit by a serious hurricane. It will allow us to suspend all of our debt payments for 2 years and to pay them and bring them at the back end of the loan. It will release liquidity in the vicinity of about 19 to 20% of GDP in that 2-year period. There is no country or institution globally that will give us that kind of money, particularly when nation states are being forced to finance more and more damage, particularly because of the lack of access to insurance or the high premium that insurance is bringing down on businesses across our region because of the high exposure to catastrophic incidents in our region. That the World Bank today, under its new leadership president, Ajay Banga, has now accepted that it will do so and was responsive enough to make changes to it twice in a 6-month period, tells us that our voices are finally being listened to on key initiatives with respect to the reform of the system. That we have today a Resilience and Sustainability Trust at the International Monetary Fund, and that has the ownership of many recognizing that this is the first long-term instrument that is being made 20 years, 10.5-year moratorium. It is true that the one constraint is that it is for those who have a relationship with the fund. And it is true that there is no quota for loss. But it is the first time that that institution has recognized, or any Bretton Woods institution or major development bank has recognized, that vulnerability ought to be the basis for concessional funding and not simply historic GDP and GNI. But does it stop there? No. We believe, and Bridgetown 3.0 says clearly, as I said earlier, there can be no separation of people and planet, and that we need to change the rules of the game. We need to ensure that our voices can be heard. We need to ensure that there is also the capacity to shock-proof our economies because of the scale of the polycrises that we are facing. And we need to ensure that we dramatically increase financing, not just for climate, but for sustainable development goals. Michael Manley would have been on the front line of this call for economic justice were he alive today. And that is why I make no apology in saying that the Bridgetown Initiative is an offspring of Michael Manley's advocacy and efforts for the construction of a new international economic order in the 1970s. But this document goes further because it is really asking the world to make a quantum leap in terms of recognizing that in a globally interdependent world, we must recognize that there must be a global commons and there must be the protection of global public goods. And those goods are for us to be able to deal with and to prepare and adapt and to mitigate where possible the climate crisis and the loss of biodiversity. Two, as a subset of that, because we are human beings who cannot survive for long without food and water, that we address the issue urgently of food and nutritional security and water security. Thirdly, that we fight the pandemics, both the traditional ones and the silent slow motion pandemic of AMR to which I referred earlier. Fourthly, that in today's world where there are more and more people week by week emerging as victims of war and fragility, and in our own region, even though we do not have a theater of war, we have, regrettably, the spectacle of being the region that has the highest homicide rate in the world per capita. A totally unacceptable position, largely driven by paying a very heavy price, as I said recently in Barbados, for the Second Amendment rights of the Americans, because of the intrusion of guns and assault weapons that have no place in civilized society. And fifthly, the removal of digital illiteracy and the removal of the inequities that relate to it, starting first and foremost with the absence of access to electricity for over 600 million Africans, and building upon that to ensure that every child has access to some form of literacy that is enhanced by digital literacy, recognizing that access to education is the basis upon which we can secure the transformation and the protection of our societies and this world. And related to that are the two difficult issues that the global commons must recognize and confront. How do you deal with fake news in democratic societies which have the capacity to literally undermine the will of the people, largely because of the power of algorithms and the power of those who have access to be able to shape those algorithms? And how do we find the balance between the power of AI and the danger of AI, which threatens, like Frankenstein, to eat its creator? These are the 5 general precepts for the establishment of a global commons and the global public goods. The problem is that the world is saying, and there's some merit in it, that the developed countries themselves are saying that especially with the spectacle of war and defense spending and other difficult fiscal adjustments coming out of COVID, that there may not be sufficient public money, as we traditionally know it, to finance these global public goods. Well, fine, if there is not traditional public money available, then let's redesign the system. You cannot tell me that it is okay to say the polluter must pay as a principle, and we simply forget it when it comes to how we treat to the global commons. You cannot tell me that a person who commits a tort is responsible at law at damages in private law. But in the public international sphere, we are not prepared to find modalities to hold people accountable. The reality is that the majority of multinational corporations, as you learned, as Michael Manley learned, even here with the bauxite companies in the 1970s, have balance sheets that will dwarf most of the states of the world that are not the large powers of the world. And therefore, there is a balance in asking those companies who either contribute to the problem or who may benefit egregiously from the solution that there is to leave a few cents on the table. If this were a chocolate bar, and I asked you to leave 3 cents or 5 cents, you're taking a little piece of the corner, and you really would be asking me, you sure you don't want more? So that the threat of destabilization to those companies for contributing to the global commons is simply not there. But what it reflects is an equity, not inequity, an equitable solution to being able to allow us to balance out. We talk, and Barbados now chairs with France and Kenya, the Global Solidarity Committee on Levies, because we have to find a way, because the world, the climate is not waiting on us to solve Ukraine or to solve Gaza, to solve Syria, to solve the homicide rate in the Caribbean and Central and Latin America. It's not waiting on us. And we continue, therefore, to see the excesses unfold in ways that are now threatening basic food security in the region. Beryl caused crops to go. But it isn't only the multinational corporations, and let's break it down to give you an example before I move on, sorry. Fossil fuel companies can find a way of contributing a few cents in the dollar. Shipping companies who contribute to the greenhouse gas emissions but pay nothing. There is now a proposal that potentially can see them helping to finance, okay, ship owners' rebuilding of green ships, but equally leaving money for what is known as in-scope activity, in other words, coastal infrastructure, to be able to help countries build out and protect themselves and to provide the resilience that we need. Air traffic. We believe that there is no person who will stop traveling because if you put on a business travel ticket or a first class ticket, a mandatory contribution of $25 or $100 respectively, and leave economy without a mandatory commitment so that people will be asked, because agency is important in fighting this battle. And you ask people, will you pay $5 for domestic or regional travel or $10 for international travel to help save the planet? So that the people who benefit and whose children and grandchildren will benefit feel that they too are making a difference in the effort to save the world. And if you took it to pharmaceuticals and to pandemic, you would expect them to put their part. And if you took it to digital illiteracy, you would expect those companies that now have market capitalizations in the trillions of dollars to leave a little something on the table so that we can secure we're not going to make all the SDGs by 2030, but we must now prioritize to build the bridges that will unlock the rest. And that must mean fighting hunger and poverty. That must mean providing education across the world. That must mean ensuring that we have the technical capacity to unfold the benefit of renewable energy while at the same time creating the opportunities for green investment, because foreign capital alone will only make us tenants in our own land, and therefore the domestic resource mobilization and the aggregation of capital is necessary to balance the equation so our own citizens do not become tenants in their own land. I say these things because I genuinely believe that in the same way we saw over centuries the evolution of the joint stock company, in the same way we saw over centuries the emergence of the nation state, in the same way that we recognize that this is the beginning of the end of a current world order, that we have to be prepared to recognize and to determine what are the things that are necessary to secure lives and livelihoods, people and planet, without being wed to systems that are no longer working for us and that were made in the image of people who only want to dominate and exploit. That is the spirit of Michael Manley and the word of love being practiced. I say to you today that when all of that is combined, we still have to come back home to the most basic and elemental of truths. That you and you and you and you and you and me have first always to summon the courage and to look in the mirror and to believe, as Errol Barrow said, in our mirror image. To believe, as Marcus Garvey said, that it is critical that we emancipate ourselves from mental slavery And we forge the strength and courage to develop the confidence, not just simply to say that no man is better than me and I am not better than any man, because our people now accept that. But coming with those rights now come responsibilities, because there is no right that can exist forever without a responsibility to tend to the things. A house, this building, you leave it unchecked and unattended for, and it starts to fall. You leave your body unattended for, it atrophies. And we as a region have a duty to have mature conversations, first to begin to understand how we can reclaim the mental landscape of our own citizens, recognizing, as I did in a CARICOM Ministers of Culture meeting as a young senator in this country 33, 34 years ago, that we will never be able to stop information from flowing in unless we close down our society. It's not practical. So that what we must do is root our people, so that when the gale force winds start to blow, the trees may bend, but they will not break. The roots are complex, and the educational system needs to be transformed to ensure, as difficult as it is, and believe you me, as I go through this process in Barbados, I know it is difficult, because nobody wants to feel as though they are on the front line of change, particularly when the change may have implications for their own household. But in the same way that a person who is a diabetic recognizes that if I don't make that decision to sacrifice a toe, I may make the foot or the leg, or worse than that, the body through sepsis, at risk. We as a region need to understand that the price of freedom is also equally the anchoring of responsibility in this Caribbean region. If we do not determine that it is our responsibility, yes, to produce global citizens, but anchored always with Caribbean roots, we may find ourselves simply as another satellite location of someone who wants to shape our mental landscape in an image to support their consumerism and to support their other plans. Guns don't walk, and guns don't talk. The ability to boost our cultural confidence and to change our mental landscape and our attitudes towards work, towards how we treat one another, is at the core of what lies before us now. And if it was urgent when there was broadcasting from overseas, it is more urgent with the narrowcasting that takes place with these instruments that are in the hands of each and every one of our citizens, either directly or indirectly. I hope that we will learn from the language and from the teachings of Michael Manley as it relates to this area. Your country has proclaimed that the extent to which you felt proud and strong, and to which your artistic expression reflected that sense of pride, perhaps emerged more under Michael Manley than at any other period in your post-independence history. The passion with which he addressed these issues is clear to all. But what, for me, stands out is that it doesn't matter how much we talk about it. It is only in the expression of our actions that the true difference will come. And we've gotten aspects of it on the creative side correct. It is true that there are aspects that require greater conversation, because I say all the time, who is the greatest Caribbean artist of all time? And if it was Bob, I never heard him denigrate a woman in his lyrics, and I never heard him promote the use of violence and guns in his lyrics either. So how he gets so popular worldwide? And we have to start to have these conversations with ourselves in a way that recognizes that we are stewards of our landscape and our environment for the time that we are here. I believe that that is not only going to show a benefit with respect to the reduction of violence and the management of conflict, but in the increased productivity and in the changing of our attitudes towards work, and to recognize that work is not a dirty four-letter word, as it was intended to be when slaves were forced to do it without reference to day or night, or pain or pleasure. But work truly is something that can bring dignity, because work is at the core of each person's ability to chart their destiny as individual citizens capable of being able to make decisions, because freedom is choice. And if we can have the capacity to give a person shelter that they can earn and pay for, and food that they can earn and pay for, and the pleasures that they would like, then we will be a better society. But many of these things relate not just to the concept of love or the concept of Ubuntu, I am because we are, the commonalities of that, or the commonalities of the principle of covenants that the Jewish people speak of with respect to being able to come together to do things that which neither of us can achieve on our own. This is what the world requires of us now as we search for where this new world order is going to emerge and land. There are going to be difficult conversations. There are going to be impossible conversations and options sometimes. But what matters more is our commitment to love, solidarity, and justice, and the building of a resilient spirit that will allow us to march out, just as I can't see the people at the back because of that light. There are elements of how we shall walk by faith anchored in principles, because we simply do not know what next year this time, or even as we saw with France and Syria, next week this time will look like. I want to use some words that stuck with me at the end of this book for us to reflect on. And I say to my own people and to all Caribbean people, if you have not had the pleasure of reading The Politics of Change, please do so. There are one or two things that may not be appropriate, but there is much that still guides us. And if we accept that this is a relay race in the land of relays, then we have a duty, as the Talmud tells us, to recognize that we may not be expected to complete the task, but neither are we at liberty to resile from it. Each generation must make progress. Each generation must carry the baton ahead. But each generation will have doubts sometimes. And that is why I quote these words and commend them to you, as I have for myself. And I quote, "It takes great clarity of vision and consistency of purpose to hold to policies in the face of the articulate opposition through which small but vocal groups try to divert us from our purpose. And finally, in the small hours of the night, when uncertainty and the consciousness of human frailty tend to creep up on their unsuspecting victims, it takes a will of iron to hold to your course and to know that you are summoned by fate to common sense, to compassion, and to unswerving purpose. If the moral purpose of this mission is to remain intact, it must be approached in humility and supported by prayer. Hegel once remarked that, and I quote, "History is the march of God in the world," unquote. Ours then is the task to see that the road tends towards justice. My friends, the story of Micheal Manley is not just the story of Jamaica. It is ours in the region, in the Caribbean, and it is ours in the global South. His legacy belongs to every Caribbean child who dreams, to every Caribbean worker who struggles, and indeed to every Caribbean leader who dares to hope but remains determined to do. Against that backdrop, I say, let us not honor him with words. Let us make his vision our mission. Let us agree that there is a floor below which no Caribbean citizen should be allowed to go as we build out this region. Let us agree that growth without equity is not growth that we want. Let us say with conviction that this Caribbean region will rise not because we're big, but because we're brave. And because we understand who we are. And we understand what our mission is. And we understand that a people who have been dehumanized and oppressed for decades and centuries have a duty to be able to pay forward in the form of a humanizing influence on a world that is riveted now by man-made emotions such as greed and conflict and war. And if they are man-made, they can be unman-made. Let us stay focused, not because we are rich, but because we labor in a righteous cause. In a righteous cause. And we remind the world that we who represent a little piece of every civilization on this earth know what it is to be able to want to ensure the survival of every civilization and every aspect of our humanity. We do so simply because it will lead us to our best future. And we do so because we have a love for people and planet that requires of us actions that perhaps no previous generation has had to confront in terms of the duality of extinction. Arrogance will cause us to believe that we will not become extinct as a race, but other living organisms, have become extinct in our certain knowledge. We do so believing that civilizations will remain dominant, but history is replete with civilizations that have risen and that have fallen. The only sure thing is that if we take this future, not alone, as individual islands, but as Caribbean people, as third world people, as people of the global south, as people, hopefully, of the global north, as humanity, we will have a true opportunity to sustain life and to sustain livelihoods. If we do it in the name of love. Yes, the word is love. Thank you. Thank you. I have a confession to make now. I have given many speeches, but not many have given me as much angst as this. And it is because, in a very real sense, I came face to face with understanding what has brought me on this journey. The fact that I can't see your faces has made it even more complex and difficult. Because I don't read, as you know, but I want to communicate always. And it was in this country, as a young senator coming to that same meeting, and Donna, you took me to a meeting when you were parliamentary secretary in the Ministry of Culture, and Paul Robertson was your minister, I believe, and a number of other people were speaking. And I stood up at the back of the room, 25 years old, and I heard a number of Jamaicans say, "Man, that's a speech that them write for him." When I listen to more. And I made a commitment on that day that I would never read a speech in my public life. So for those who ask why I don't read speeches, it is the fault of the people of Jamaica in Kingston Town.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are in the presence of leadership royalty. Don't you agree? History-making humans with awe-inspiring political and social rhetoric. By the way, I had a whole idea in my mind of what would happen when I met you, the Honorable Mia Mottley. I would fan out and ask you for many pictures, but here I am with protocols observed, well-behaved. I will do it later. But with every word that she said, I know you all agree that she gave us knowledge, and that knowledge gave us power so that we can effect change in our society, right? And, of course, ending it with the word is love was the best way ever, because we do have love for her. But we could not have Auntie Mia. Auntie Mia, you know, that's what we call you, right? We couldn't have Auntie Mia here without we having a question and answer engagement. And so we have the man with the, you may sit. Sorry, you may sit. We have a question and answer segment because I know that you may have some burning questions. We can't take all of them, and we have prepared some as well. And we have the very fashion-forward man who's always asking the hard-hitting questions to lead that section. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Raymond Price.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's my duty and an honor on your behalf to pose these questions to the Honorable Mia Mottley. Good evening, Prime Minister.
Good evening, Raymond.
First name. Good evening.
Well, I only have one first name too, so call me Mia.
I shall, Prime Minister, not call you Mia.
You are obviously a disobedient man. Does your leader know that?
No, if among the books that you would author, or which would be authored about the time in which you are Prime Minister of Barbados, were to be entitled, would you choose The Politics of Change, or would you choose Politics Has Changed?
Neither.
Which one would you choose?
The politics of change for me helped shape a lot of my perspective on politics in the Caribbean, politics in a third world country, the recognition that there has to be fundamental transformation of us as a people. And we're hard on ourselves because we are not yet 100 years independent. And we've done so much already without necessarily the tribulations and civil war that others have had to endure to get there. But I genuinely believe that I would have loved to be able to come in at a time where I could play every shot in the game, and to really embrace transformation as at the core. But I have come to understand that the development of resilience, more than anything else at the time in which we live, is going to be required of us, because none of us can predict the future. I came to office in May 2018, Within 6 days, I went to the International Monetary Fund. And tonight, there's so many other things that I wanted to talk about, but before time, I didn't. I told the then Managing Director, Christine Lagarde, that tomorrow we are going to announce selective credit default of our debt, domestic and external, and that we're coming to the International Monetary Fund because Barbados' debt to GDP is 177% when we include the 19% of arrears that have not been paid in some instances for almost 5 years. We were the third most indebted country, debt to GDP per capita in the world, when we took over. The first morning after Cabinet was sworn in, we met with the social partnership. And I had a simple question. Who in here wants to save the Barbados dollar? And of course, everybody put up the hand. And then I said, everybody write down the top 3 to 5 reasons. And at the end of the day, there was 80% agreement on the steps to be taken. When I spoke to Madame Lagarde, I said, look, I said, this is not an easy decision, but I must tell you, before you carry people on a long journey, you got to give them a little breakfast. And she was very respectful, and she said, I'll send somebody on Sunday, I'll speak tomorrow when you announce, and by Sunday in 48 hours, you'll have somebody. It turned out to be Bert, who was here in Jamaica, and for whom that experience helped us considerably, because he was not coming as a neophyte to the region. 2 weeks later, I gave the first budget, and they then understood that we were not joking. Barbados then had to undergo a $1 billion adjustment, which effectively was just about 10-11% of GDP. We restructured our domestic debt within 3 months. We settled the IMF program within 3 months, driven by a homegrown program that we had prepared when in opposition. We polled the Barbadian public on the state-owned enterprises because the then governor of the central bank felt that we should have sent home 4,000 to 5,000 people, which would be the equivalent of about 1 in every 4 public servants. Totally, totally unacceptable. And we developed a simple message, an approach. We're going to share the burden, but we're going to share the bounty. And we believe that that bounty might come soon again. Little did we know, it took us another year to restructure the external debt. We finished restructuring the external debt in December 2019. I don't need to tell you what happened in January 2020. It was COVID. And from COVID, we then went in 2020 to more lockdown in 2021. And the week when we, from December 31st, imagine having to lock down a country All Year's Day, New Year's Eve, at 10 o'clock in the morning. It was not a pleasant act. But by April, when we were opening up again, we then had the ashfall from St. Vincent, which, the volcano there, which shut down the Bridgetown port for 7 days and shut down our airport for 9 days. Yes. 2 weeks later, we had, that's April? Sorry, 6 weeks later, we had a freak storm. That if I was not up, I would not have believed it. I had 46,000 lightning strikes in less than 2 hours. And 2 weeks later, we had our first hurricane. Not devastating, but bad enough in 66 years. I say all of these things because my time in office has only known crisis. And the only way you get through crisis is by developing and being resilient. We stand here because our ancestors were resilient enough to fight off and to do whatever it took for them to secure the next generation and the next generation and the next generation. So that as we wait for the birthing of this new world order, I believe that the name of the book has to be being the most and best resilient version of ourselves. Now that's an inadequate, unpoetic way of saying it, and I'm sure we can find a more poetic way of saying that, but that's the message.
Prime Minister, In your presentation just now, you used the word dignity on several occasions. Insofar as dignity is a qualitative and therefore subjective parameter, is there value in the pursuit of policies based on achieving dignity?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, look, we accept that people got to feel good about themselves individually and collectively as a people. And in the same book, Michael Manley talks about the fact that our independence movement didn't come out of great wars, and therefore we don't have the great wars that the Europeans and others and the Americans will rely on to be able to define their nationhood. But we have great wars that took place nevertheless because we know about them, but the story was never told. And that in many instances, we have tried as a people, as you have done here in Jamaica, to capture the leaders of the rebellion through slavery and through colonialism as persons who stood out and who led others who sacrificed their lives, and in some instances they did too. That really helped to define who we are. And when you read Marcus Garvey, and when you listen to much of Bob's work, what is it that they're really telling us? They're reinforcing the dignity of who we are as a people. And when we say look in the mirror and like who you see in the mirror, that's really about assuring yourself that you're affording yourself a dignity that is important. In our own case in Barbados, one of the first things we did when coming to office, even in an IMF program, and this is the point that I want to make, because there's this notion that all fund programs are bad. That's not been our experience. In an IMF program, we were immediately, within 2 weeks of announcing to her, before settling the program, we reintroduced tertiary education, free, to all Bajans at the University of the West Indies. We refleeted the transport board. We had not bought buses for 13 years. We bought sanitation trucks that had not been bought for 10 years. We built a new accident and emergency. We gave a 5% wage increase immediately, and since then, while still in the program as we are, 2 more wage increases, given 3 at a time when they had only received 1 10 years prior to our coming to office. We created Golden Square, and for those who have not visited Barbados, Golden Square was where the 1937 rebellion and revolution took place. That's where Clement Payne was taken from. That's where the speeches were. And for many years, we used to have to go in the corner of Golden Square, in the back of a little corner, and hide and put down flowers and pictures. I said, no, open up the square and make it available to the entire country. And we have a wall that embraces the name, last name of every single Bajan that ever lived in the country. And for those whose last name we don't know because they were slaves and not given a name, we put names of the slaves that we know on that wall too, to pay tribute, because it is important that those little boys and girls who come and walk through Golden Square know that they come from somewhere, and know that they have a proud history, and know that dignity is to be afforded to each and every one. So I can't even begin. And that is what the legacy of Michael Manley and Errol Barrow and Grantley Adams and Norman Manley and all of those great Caribbean titles. But forget the politicians. Let's deal with the artists and the writers. That's what they have forged in us when given the opportunity to be able to tell our own story and to imagine our own possibilities.
Now, the next question covers my area of professional pursuits: environment, sustainable energy, climate change. To the extent that your emphasis on mainstreaming climate change and the impacts of global warming as
Fighting the climate crisis.
Climate crisis, yes, you renamed it, and it's appropriate that you have. To the extent that you have placed climate crisis as a centerpiece of international politics, and that could place you at the epicenter of the pushback from powerful companies and nations in the North. Why are you still unafraid to do that, if indeed such an outcome of a pushback against Mia Mottley is likely?
Because it's not about Mia Mottley, one. And two, because I genuinely believe that we will find common purpose. The question is, how long will it take for us to do so, and how many people will be sacrificed before we do so? Humanity does not allow evil to triumph ultimately. It may take a little longer, but we get there. And I genuinely believe that what is needed is actually more conversation rather than less talking at and talking about. We need to talk with each other. Because if we start to talk with each other, just as I did that first morning after the cabinet was sworn in with the social partnership, what is it that unites us? Who in here wants to save the dollar? Who in here wants to save the planet? And how are we going to do so? We may differ as to the causes, but we can also find common purpose as to some of the solutions, even if we have different reasons for believing why those solutions are appropriate. Some may see it purely as a financial opportunity with the Green Revolution because there is money to be made in the green transition. Some may feel that it is because it is the right thing to do. Whatever motivates you, my simple interest is that we take the action to adapt, to become more resilient, to mitigate, and to do the things that will allow lives and livelihoods to be saved.
Prime Minister, this question is from a Bajan in the audience who lives here in Jamaica. How do we engage our young people in nation building and culture building within a space where they are increasingly disillusioned and disaffected by politics, economics, and their own ability to find success in their home islands or within CARICOM?
I think that, to begin with, we have to recognize that there is place and opportunity, and that in many instances we need to talk with and nurture our young people in close quarter so that they do not feel irrelevant to the process. I also feel strongly that we have to give opportunities. And in fact, the biggest problem in the region now is ironic. I don't go to sleep worrying about reserves anymore. I go to sleep worrying about skills deficit. And country by country by country, because of the aging and declining population, has in the region to contend with this issue. It is against that backdrop, therefore, there is going to be naturally many opportunities for young people. And the question is, have they been trained for the specific areas for which these opportunities occur? We, for example, have recognized that there has to be conversations with the university and other institutions to perhaps better tailor to the needs of our emerging economies, areas of activity that we cannot disregard, coastal infrastructure, a whole host of things that we just talked about in terms of sustainable expression and things. We have also a global audience when it comes to the creation of cultural assets or to the expression of our sporting activities, as you know well here in Jamaican athletics, as we know in cricket, or certainly continue to try to know.
And in music with
and
Rihanna.
The ecosystem, music, etc. But also the professions, also in diplomacy. I mean, there's so many other areas. And that's why I keep using the phrase global citizens, but with Caribbean roots. So it is easy to look at a glass and believe it is half empty. I believe you should look at it and see that it is half full. And I believe that there are opportunities in this region. I do believe that we have to do a better job at building out a society for our young people while protecting our elderly in the society. Because if our young people choose to leave, then we have no one to build. And in a very real sense, it is for them that we are building out our nations and trying to save the earth. So I say simply to that Bajan person that whether you're in Jamaica or Barbados, once you're building out the Caribbean civilization, that is what matters. And that's why I said earlier that there has to be a floor of rights below which no Caribbean citizen should fall. Because the truth is that the restrictions that we are putting on the movement of people really are almost a falsehood. Because we don't have the luxury of really that when we really need more people to come in and more people to build out our societies and economies at a higher level of activity than we've seen in the past.
You've practically answered the final question, which had come from the audience, which was, how can we fuel, if not refuel, a consciousness of the importance of regionalism among Caribbean youth who could, among other labels, be described as otherwise invested?
It's going to be a little more difficult because of the extent to which, as I said, narrowcasting and social media command their attention. But it's not impossible. We go to the schools as children. That's a commonplace. We play sports. We listen to Caribbean music. We look at other Caribbean cultural expressions. I believe that we have to be far more creative in using our soft power to be able to reinforce in our people that sense of Caribbeanness and oneness. And the truth is they have it. When the music plays, when the sports are doing well, there's there. But why haven't we translated that into the more formal areas where we interact with people? I don't know what happens here in Jamaica, but one of the things that concerns me is that our children are full of energy and expression if they are outside of the classroom, outside of the church, outside of the workplace. So what is it that those locations are doing to creativity and to expression that we need to take a look ourselves again to ensure that we're not dulling or suppressing things that we ought to be nurturing and placing guardrails to encourage? And this is not the effort of a government alone. This is the effort of a people.
Mic check.
Last point. He talks about having a major national project, and in his case, it was fighting illiteracy. I say in Barbados that we are small enough to be able to fight poverty. The poverty indices show that 1 in every 5 Bajan families, last time there was a formal report, and we're waiting for a new one now, had gone from 13% to 20% just before we came into government. But what does that mean? If 1 in every 5 are below the poverty line, what is it really telling us? That 4 out of every 5 are above it. And that if we were to come together to help each other, you talk about the share pot here in the tenement yard. We talk about it in the context of our villages in terms of what lifted us up. If we were to come together and recognize that removing people from poverty is, yes, first an economic activity, but it is also about the social ills. It is also about other things that contribute to people remaining in poverty. And a government, while it plays a critical role in nurturing the policies and facilitating the opportunities that are necessary for people, it cannot do it alone without the other institutions in civil society, from the family to the church, to the mosque, to Rastafari, to whoever, to sports, to cultural activity. And that we have to move our people first and foremost from dependence as a result of poverty to independence, but then to the final stage of giving back in the form of interdependence. And that's not going to happen in 2 or 3 years. That's a 10, 15-year exercise minimum for most families. Some may come out a little quicker, some will need the extra time. And therefore, I really do believe that in setting these national projects that we recognize that we need to go wider than just government, and we need to find that space where nationhood imposes on us a responsibility to duty, that goes beyond duty to self, duty to family, and duty to job, because those fall within the individual pursuit of happiness. But it is in the broader duties that we build the nation, and that we strengthen the people, and that we develop the resilience that we can fight anything that comes our way. And it's not going to happen simply because we say it, and it's not going to happen overnight, but we must stay the course, and we must pass the baton in the relay until the battle is over.
Ladies and gentlemen, Prime Minister Mia Mottley, our lecturer today at the Micheal Manley Centenary.
Thank you very much. And may I invite you all to carry Festa in Barbados in August next year, 2025. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are not yet done. Just a few minutes more. We have a presentation by the Honorable Glenn Manley to Honorable Mia Mottley.
Oh, the podium.
Thank you.
This, not this. Good evening, everybody. There should be a law in the world that nobody be allowed to speak after Mia Mottley, because we all need time to reflect on what she said, because it was not rubbish the woman was telling us. But anyway, dear friends, Micheal and I had a pact that worked very well, and I'll bring you in on the secret. I'm known to be non-academic, non-political, the wife number 5, the last wife. What are we doing? But at this particular point in time, I'd like to tell you that although I'm known as not being political, in fact, I'm a lifelong card-carrying member of the People's National Party since 1962. Okay, and I used to rush home from work to listen to N.W. Manley speak on the radio. We didn't have TV in those days, but he was so brilliant, and it was the start of my love of politics in Jamaica from afar, from afar. So Micheal and I had this pact that he would do all the talking outside of the house. He was very good at that. And I would do all the talking inside the house. Sometimes Micheal referred that to as nagging, but don't believe him, don't believe him. But when I was asked by Donna to say a few words about and to Mia Mottley, I said, I'm a great speaker, I want to do it. I jumped at the opportunity to express my deep and sincere admiration and respect and love for this brilliant woman. The first time I saw Prime Minister Motley on TV, in those days we called it the idiot box, I said to myself after viewing her, I like this woman. She had a presence that was just beautiful. She had dignity. She had an energy. She had a truth about her words. She had brilliance that was able to express complex ideas like Micheal in very simple terms for the rest of us. And she was a sensitive woman, and I was so proud that she was from the Caribbean, and I'm privileged to have actually met her today. Since the first viewing of her, it's been a pleasure to follow her career, and I'm not at all surprised by her meteoric rise and by her growing influence on the world as a bold champion for global change. Now, Mia stole the best part of my speech, and that was the story of her being caught in school reading the book by Micheal. But this is what I've been told, but I'm going to tell it because mine is more interesting, okay? Her teacher caught her reading and said, "This is highly inappropriate." I understand she was sent to detention and recommended, listen to this, that she read Nancy Drew, and that this was more girl appropriate. We've come far. I'll bet you dollars to donuts that young Mia finished reading Micheal's book. And she did not convert to reading bland, girly novels, but continued to learn from other progressive authors of the day, and she dedicated her work towards a search for solutions. That's another book of Micheal's, Search for Solutions. Oh, okay. And that is because she is not an average woman. She's not an average human being. You don't realize how special it is for her to know her. And I got my picture taken with her today. And I'm just bursting with, I think it's love. And she explained Micheal's words to me away today and saying that it is a hearing, it is a knowing, and it is a feeling. Though it's not just the word is love, it's all of those things that Micheal taught us. And it's always been one of my favorites of the slogans that were around in the 70s. Anyway, now listen to me. I'm going to take you on a dream that I have, and that suppose it were possible to be a fly on the wall when Mia and Micheal meet. Yes? And you could listen to them share ideas. You could watch them stimulate and excite each other with possibilities and share their separate but in many ways similar goals for the world. I mean, what could be better than that? And you would be so energized from the energy that these two fantastic people would share and with each other, and they've given so much. So, Prime Minister Motley, it has been an honor, and I'm not just saying the right thing. It's a real honor to be here with you, and I thank you for coming. You have made this occasion very, very special, not just to me, but the room is filled with love. Wherever Micheal is, I feel his happiness tonight. I feel it, honestly. And he's smiling. No, he's not smiling. He's beaming with love and admiration for this wonderful woman, Prime Minister Mia Mottley. Please accept this small token.
Thank you.
Of our love and admiration. And I look forward to next year, you're coming back. Thank you.
I'm always here. Thank you. Thank you so much for your kind words. Thank you for your love. And as I said, please know that I would like to see all of you for Barbados to carry Festa next year. God bless.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mrs. Glyn Manley, and of course, the Honorable Mia Mottley. We have our official vote of thanks from Ria Manley. Please make her welcome.
Good evening to all who remain. All protocols observed, so I can't see whether everybody is still in, but to single out specifically, of course, the Honorable P.J. Patterson, Mr. Mark Golding MP, and Dr. Peter Phillips. These are all longtime friends of mine and my family, so we're very pleased that you are here this evening, and also for remarks that you shared ahead of Mia's address. And honestly, in considering what to say today, I have shared reflections recently at the opening of the Micheal Manley Conference about a week ago, and closed with the thought that the Caribbean will do well with more leaders of conscience who understand that decolonization is not a historical flashpoint, but rather a deeper process of emancipation that each generation must respond to in the context of their time. Putting a call to the audience to consider ways to move beyond their physical and intellectual comfort to get close enough to injustice that you indict as an individual, not just to condemn what you don't like to see into abstraction, but to understand the conditions of inequality, step outside of safety and thought, and to find what love means for you. I think tonight it's very clear that Honorable Prime Minister Mia Mottley has done that throughout her life, starting from her teenage bullying, which I can relate to. I'm glad that she was able to come around to the book again, and again to a memory that I have that is very distinct of this room. My earliest memories of it are when the Micheal Manley Award for Self-Reliance, sorry for not thanking you earlier, Micheal Manley Foundation, but that event in this room is one of the seminal memories that I have of the significance of my grandfather throughout my childhood. And I really appreciated the way that she brought the significance of self-reliance into the context of regional connectivity. On behalf of my entire family, we thank you for organizing all of these events and for the brilliant keynote. Blessings and good evening. The word is always, always love.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for staying. I know we have been absolutely empowered. Just to give a special thanks to our sponsors, Jack Den, Covenant Insurance Brokers, Senator Peter Bunting, Lisa Hanna, Bilton Graham, Peter Reed, Dr. Peter Phillips, Diane and Gordon Tawani. Also to the committee members, Senator Donna Scott Motley, Senator Sophia Fraser-Binns, Sandra Faulkner, Claire Miller, and Dallas Campbell. Please be safe. I have been your host, Dania Beckford. The word is love.
Happy birthday, dear my championed several bodies of legislation and programs which expanded workers' rights. Along with the PNP, Micheal Manley raised the workers' standard of living, including the minimum wage and the compulsory recognition of trade unions.
My dream for Jamaica would be to find a way to create a complete mobilization of the Jamaican people so that they were working together to build something, instead of like now, when they often work against each other and destroy many of the possibilities of progress and change. Because the truth is you can commit yourself to a just society and to the idea of people living well and all that goes with that. But if you can't mobilize the people so that they pull together to do it, they feel we are Jamaicans, this is our country, and it's up to us to make it into a great place, you'll never be able to realize the dream.
With a deep commitment to economic independence and social justice, Manley began a process of social and economic reform.
A lot of changes have to take place in this country. A lot of changes.
Micheal Manley's concern for the family was well known. He heralded the call for equality of the sexes and established the Bureau of Women's Affairs to deal with discrimination against women. December 1, 1974 was historic with the tabling of the Equal Pay Law, which provided that women doing the same jobs as men were entitled to the same pay. The establishment of the family court was another act of great significance. Attendant on this was the Affiliation Act, so that fathers who desert mothers and their children and migrate can be sued for the maintenance of their children. The Equal Status for Children Act repealing the Bastard Act could possibly be seen as the greatest single social achievement of Manley in the 1970s. All children, by law, could now inherit the legacy of their parents.
No bastard, no day again. No bastard, no day again. Everyone laughful. Everyone laughful.
The establishment of a minimum wage was a plus for the working class. It stipulated that every man or woman entering into a contract of service must be paid a minimum wage and should not work for more than the prescribed maximum hours without getting overtime pay.
Realize that employment is the most important single objective of government in this country. Because the unemployed is a man to whom freedom is not even a word, certainly not an idea. At the root of our policy in the future will be humanism, self-reliance, and economic nationalism to create a society of personal freedom founded in the security of the family and a true nation resting securely upon a foundation of economic independence. In short, a society of justice and freedom. I'm going to tell you the thing that is closest to my heart. Housing. When a man and his loved one can look at a roof and know that it cannot leak, can know there is a little kitchen where they can cook in dignity, can know there is somewhere they can sit down and break bread together, can know there is a room that they can put the children in, and know that at night the children can go and sleep there in peace. That when you have done that, you have started, you have laid the foundation for Christian life and for justice.
In the modern world, the most important of all the tools of mankind is the ability to read and write.
Therefore, sir, I'm very pleased to announce that the government of Jamaica commencing September of this year, is announcing a scheme for free secondary education in Jamaica. We're going further, sir, and that is that for those children that can fight through the primary system, fight through the secondary system, fight through to their O levels, fight through the whole of the competition to reach university at the end, to get the final touch on the skills that we need, we are also abolishing the fees of Jamaican students at university. These are the means by which the power will come to the people. Sacrifice now for a great day tomorrow, where we will march together in the name of work, in the name of justice, because the word is love.
They are changed. Let us speak of change. Labor Day was change as people began to feel self-reliance. The People's Food Complex that is coming is change because it will bring relief. That is change. Operation Grow is change. The leasehold system is there for change. The integrity legislation is change. The literacy program is change. The recognition of women's rights is change. The 40-hour work week for government workers is change. The Workers' Bank that is coming is change. The creation of equal status for all children in Jamaica is change. The law to prevent non-Jamaicans owning our land is change. The 18-year-old vote is change. Free education for the people is change.
Think well about past sins.
Piensen cuidadosamente en todos los pecados que han cometido en el pasado.
My comrades and friends, finally,
mis amigos y compañeros, finalmente,
we face a long, hard road.
Tenemos ante nosotros un camino largo y duro.
We face tremendous problems.
Nos enfrentamos a tremendos problemas.
But our eyes,
pero nuestros ojos
are fixed,
están fijos
on the mountain tops,
en la cima de las montañas,
of a dream,
de un sueño,
of a new kind of society,
de un nuevo tipo de sociedad,
based on principles,
basado en los principios
of brotherhood,
de la hermandad,
of equality,
de la igualdad,
of respect for people,
del respeto a los pueblos,
of love for children,
del amor a los niños,
and of working together for the common good of all mankind.
Y de trabajar juntos por el bienestar de toda la humanidad.
And I tell you as the party leader, as long as this party is in power, we intend to walk through the world on our feet and not on our knees.
We paid for it, we paid for it dearly in terms of aid. But Micheal was very clear that, it's certain things you just have to take a stand on. Very firm on that.
A very rare and extraordinary privilege to have been allowed to serve in this chamber, and I must say to have made many, many friends on both sides of the aisle. As I go, I ask two things. One, I think you would do well always to listen to and be receptive to criticism. Because we have to learn, we have to improve, we are not perfect. And many criticisms are well-founded. But at the same time, I would urge you, if you hold on to the simple guiding truth that you have one mission in the end, and that is service. No other mission. He who wants power for itself does not deserve it. And fun enough, he who dedicates his life to service through power will probably depart with some honor.
Comrades, brothers and sisters, the word is love.
I am more deeply moved than I would have the words to say by just the fact that this evening is taking place. I offer my deepest thanks to those who thought of the occasion and to all the people who worked so hard to make it happen. I thank all of you with utmost sincerity that you have found the time to share this evening with me and my family. I know you would want me especially to thank and congratulate all the people who entertained us. There are many, many people who have helped me. Always, it seemed there was an army of people, and you were a part of that army. And I want to thank all of them. They are too numerous to name in full, but all of them, and to let them all know how much I realize I owe to them, to their loyalty and their support. I want to express my appreciation for all the many friends that I have made through the years. Friends in journalism, in the trade union movement, in politics, internationally, in the academic world, in the world of art, theater, music, in the world. Most importantly, throughout all those years, the great message I carry within me is about the loyalty of the Jamaican people. I thank all those thousands of people who have made me feel privileged and special, have made me feel cared for and protected in victory and in defeat. And wherever you may be, here or in the city, the towns, the hills, the factories, or the cane piece, I know that you, the people, are on a long march, and many others before me have walked with you. Others walk with you now, as will still others after them. It is a long road, and it must always lead to greater justice, to a greater pride in yourselves as people and in ourselves as a nation. But if we have faith in ourselves and draw strength from our history, we will find our way, we, the Jamaican people. As Carberry says, we must all help to build Jamaica.